Chapter 24, Spirit Guide, Part 2. She stayed hidden most of the time. Only once or twice a day did he catch a glimpse of her, moving through the reeds, always on his left side, always a few paces ahead. It was all he needed. He had a guide. It made a difference. He walked with certainty, trusting his feet, trusting the journey, confident of the destination. The unknowable was unimportant. He thought of something Bow Wow told him. You don't have to remember your promises to keep them. The terrain changed very little. Flat grassland shrouded in fog, small clusters of trees, mostly cottonwoods. One thing that did change was the water. There was less of it. Whenever he came upon even the smallest of streams, he always filled the bottles. He didn't eat every day. Occasionally there were berries, but little else in the vegetation. Once he caught a lone fat mallard in the small pond. In a field riddled with burrows, he set a trap before he fell asleep, waking to find a meaty, frightened groundhog shivering in the wooden cage. Once an unsuspecting jackrabbit jumped out of a spinney of willows. He was able to snatch it up by its long, lanky legs. He snared a few blackbirds, and he caught one small but tasty quail out of a family of 5, scurrying from the berry bushes. Whenever he had meat, he waited until nightfall and built a fire. It wasn't long before the wolf appeared, always shy but always hungry, sitting on her haunches across from the coals, head slightly bowed, eyes darting, cautious. The first few times she snatched the meat and dashed away quickly into the grass. Slowly she grew bolder, carrying it to a place outside the firelight, but still in full view. Eventually, she let down her guard, remaining where she was, relaxing into a reclining position, experiencing for the first time the pleasure of sharing a meal with a friend. It was then he began to talk to her. He told her about his childhood home, the little cabin outside Aberdeen. He told her about his mother, how she made pancakes, how she turned the cream into butter, how she saved the fireplace ash for the wall sconces. He described the garden in late summer, the bean vines so heavy they dragged down the poles, and the melon vines crept low along the ground until they invaded every corner of the plot. Melons the size of a man's head would be found hiding among the collard greens, and huge red tomatoes lay on the ground under the squash blossoms, their stems too weak to sustain their weight. He told her about the rabbits, Huxley and Vermilion, and Rug Chomper the dog, and how they died. How one morning he found the remains of Huxley and Vermilion in the wire pen, devoured by wild pigs, only their ears and entrails left in the dust. He couldn't remember how Rug Chomper died. It was too long ago. That was all he said the first time, for after she had licked all the grease from the bones, she looked up, suddenly startled. Reverting to her instinct, she backed away with a worried snarl and disappeared, leaving him in silence until he heard her circling, settling her full belly down for the night. Over other meals, he told her other things. He told her of the farms and the orchards of the known world, of the long hauls and the road houses where people gathered to eat, drink, dance, and make music, and the festivals. Every town had its festival. The Spring Fest and the Corn Fest and the Hop Fest and the Festival of the Migrating Tarantulas and the Festival of the Crazy Old Men. He told her of the silo in King Corn and how he had climbed it and brought down the honey, and people carried him in their arms above their heads. He told her about music, about how when a string is plucked and then halved and plucked again, it produces a mysterious thing called an octave. But when a string is trebled, it produces the even more mysterious interval of the open fifth, in which, if you listen very closely, you can hear countless hidden overtones. He told her how Jocko could coax melodies from a single catgut string tied to a metal wash bucket, tensing and loosening it with a broomstick. "I'm trusting you," he told her. "Bow Wow said a path would lead me home, and I would be given a guide. I'm trusting you will guide me home." The nights grew cold, and one morning he woke to find his jacket rimed with frost. For several days there was no food, and he did not see the wolf. He only heard her off the trail ahead of him. Vegetation thinned and water grew scarce. The land became flat like a sheet of glass, and in the mornings it was icy and slick. With no bushes to hide behind, the wolf still kept her distance, but she was always visible. If there had been an observer, he would have seen only three things: a flat, cold, fog-bound expanse, and a man following a wolf across it. One afternoon, they happened upon a field of ring-necked geese. 100 or more scattered all the way to the horizon. The wolf saw them first. From a distance, they looked like no more than freckles on the face of the plain. She took off running. He couldn't keep up with her. Ahead, he saw a mass of motion, and he heard the squawking and the fluttering of wings. They filled the sky, ordered themselves into formations, and took off for nowhere. In no time, they were gone. Across the blank page, the wolf approached. The bird in her jaws was still alive, flapping and screaming. The wolf dropped the goose at Johnny's feet and bit it once hard on the neck. Its protestations ceased. They had nothing to build a fire with. Johnny plucked the bird and sliced it open. The wolf took one wing bone, Johnny the other, and they pulled it apart. He scooped out the guts, and they settled down to their portions. The wolf devoured hers whole, but Johnny didn't have the stomach for that. He rinsed the flesh with a little of their precious water. Then he sliced it into strips. He lit a corn lamp and seared each strip before he ate it. Darkness closed in. A deep darkness, void of stars. The wolf lingered. Johnny realized he had not been telling her stories as had become the custom during a meal. He felt awkward and desolate. The night was bitter cold. The wolf began to pace. She did not go far. Several times he heard her circle and settle, but she did not stay settled. She got up, paced, circled, and settled again, over and over. He pulled his coat over his shoulders and tried to sleep. Perhaps he slept, for he woke. in the deepest, coldest part of the night, feeling strangely warm, like he remembered feeling on cold nights as a child, when his mother warmed a blanket over the coals and spread it over him while he slept. He startled, but only for a moment, as he realized what was happening. The wolf was lying against him, her forelegs across his shoulders, her furry belly pressed against his side, her muzzle nuzzled into the crook of his neck. She grizzled softly in her sleep and snuggled in closer. He was wide awake now. He was warm. He was afraid, but there was something hushed and wondrous in his fear. He was Johnny Arcane, returning from the land of chaos and cruelty. He was keeping promises he could not remember making and fulfilling his destiny. "I haven't told you about Lucy yet," he said. The wolf stirred and sighed. "Let me tell you about Lucy." But his story was broken by a far distant sound, echoing from a range of moonlit hills on the northern horizon, a mournful, lovelorn howl rising and falling on the wind. The wolf heard it too. She lifted her head, sniffed the air, whimpered, and then fell back to sleep. In the morning, she was gone. Her paw prints cut a track from the cold ashes of the campfire through the loose sand toward the low-lying hills in the north. At Johnny's feet lay the feathers and bones of last night's goose. He squinted and scanned the horizon in all directions. To the south and the east, there was only fog and the flat, salty plain over which they had traveled. But north and west, the mists were clearing, and there was something vaguely familiar about the scrubby hills. He followed the footprints as far as his eyes would allow. There was nothing moving. She was long gone. But there was something. A dark frame of a house, unpainted, leaning, a scraggly palm tree, the silhouette of a windmill, its blades turning slowly. The memory was not complete, but it was there, like a taste in the mouth. He gathered his tools into the pack, shouldered the pack, and set out. The closer he got, the sharper the focus. A long time ago. Had this even been mentioned in the book? But he was there once. There was a place in his memory for this. His heartbeat quickened as he drew nearer. The house was so abandoned, there was scarcely a membrane of life left in it. He had to step over the rotten porch boards to enter, and inside there was no floor, just splinters and sand and the tunnels left by termites. Doorless cupboards with no dishes. The cracked iron corpse of a wood stove. But one bittersweet remnant, in the split and painless window frame, the tatters of a pink curtain hung. He went outside and walked to the windmill. There was a hand pump to draw water from the well, but it was rusted shut. He sat on the well stone and stared at the house until the memory fully congealed. As a child, he had wandered the 4 directions around the home he shared with his mother, Watching, wondering, he remembered an argument they had had after the messenger brought the news of his father's death. "You don't even know the 4 directions, Mother. You only know the 4 walls of this house." "Let me tell you what I know about the 4 directions. I've been outside. I've wandered the 4 directions. There's a house on the southern horizon with a palm tree and a windmill. On a hot afternoon, it appears to be shimmering in a lake of shallow water. I walked there once. There was no water. The house was deserted, falling down. The ground was dry and barren." This was that house. He had returned to the known world. The wolf had brought him home.